Okay, I'm now at the second point, war stories we love. And O'Brien is concerned still, just because he understands that the world is chaotic and that it is hard for us to fix a truth. He's still focused on getting it right. You don't just give up. You don't just say, "Oh well, life is complex." That's it. There's more about how we tell than what we tell in this text. And what I want you to get from O'Brien as you read through it and look around it is that some of these stories will click with you and others won't. They won't make any sense necessarily. That's okay. There are some standard war narratives sort of in here, but mostly they're not. This particular overall narrative is arguably about writing, specifically about writing trauma. And on page 65, he has this very famous now formulation, justly famous formulation about truth and telling a true war story. A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you've been made a victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil, on page 65. So here, O'Brien is beginning to tell us how to read and hear not only all war stories, but his as well. I mean, as this guidance goes for his own narratives, right? So, well, why didn't he tell us this on page 1? Why is it on page 65? Does that mean that we have to go back and see whether he lied to us? Because maybe he has. Maybe he has given us stories that are, say, full of rectitude, or have morals, or we felt uplifted by them. So we would have to go back now, and a lot of the process of reading a trauma story is rereading it, because one go through isn't going to be enough. You have to visit and revisit, and listen again and think again. And your first impression, your first reading of a text is very important, and your second reading of a text is very important. Your third reading of text is very important, right? Every reading of a text is very important, and each one is different. You can never have one of them again. Apart from the fact that you can never read a text as if you've never read it before. Once you have, you also can't read it the third time you read it. You can't do that again. You'll never be there again. All you can do is keep on adding to it. And so it's rereading O'Brien that takes the effort, basically, because reading him may not be so difficult. And I find that most people just get this book. They just get it. It just clicks. In A True War Story on page 74, he says, if there's a moral at all, it's like the thread that makes the cloth. You can't tease it out. You can't extract the meaning without unraveling the deeper meaning. And in the end, really there's nothing much to say about a true war story except maybe, true war stories do not generalize. They do not indulge in abstraction or analysis, on 74. So this issue of, the essentially taking the thread out of something so you can see it in its pieces, is that the thread is the pieces. So when you unravel the thing, what you have is an unraveling. And that's a different thing again. Right? So you have to understand that. Is this one of the truths that O'Brien warned us about 6 pages or 10 pages before on page 65? Is this one of these generalizations? Because it is, after all, a generalization. The point about the moral seems to be that we can't single it out. We can't decide what a story means once and for all, and then close the discussion and be happy. Now, that's very much a postmodern view. And it's, pardon me, I just must get the last of this tea before the cold air gets to it and renders it into an amoral, lukewarm, Okay. So there isn't going to be what we call closure. Now, closure has come to mean it's been picked up by the sort of psychological movement to mean that the issue is finished and can be put away. Closure in the kind of reading that we're doing means that interpretation is over. So it does have some of the same meaning as it does in, say, a psychological concept of closure, but this is different in the sense that what you're looking for is what does the text mean, and we all struggle to say, it means, we work toward, let's say, you're given a text to interpret. I don't know, let's say you're given some McLuhan to interpret, and you're like, I don't know what this means. And then you go to a lecture and you listen to a lecture, you're like, okay, that's helpful, and you take that down, and then you have discussions and with your classmates, and then maybe you have discussions with the prof, and then everybody has a discussion, and then the prof comes back and lectures again, and all of that helps to clarify what you're supposed to take away from this so that you can write it down again on an exam at some point and say, this is what I learned. Okay, right, fine. So everybody's struggling towards like what the thing is, and at a certain point you say, this is what McLuhan is about, boom, and you put it down. And at that point, you've stopped the process of interpretation. There is no more interpretation. You're not prepared to sit there and go on and on and on, dithering and discussing what McLuhan might have meant by what a hot medium is. You're like, no, I know what that means. It means this. Boom, that's it. When you've moved for interpretive closure, you move for an end to the discussion. But O'Brien doesn't want that. He doesn't want ends to discussion. And in general, the Vietnam veterans don't want this discussion to end because the war did not fit an American narrative, and it still doesn't. And neither do the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq, despite the attempt by the Bush White House in the first two, in the Bush presidency, 2000-2004, and 2004 to 2008, attempted to impress a certain kind of meaning on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That largely didn't take. It did sort of for the first 4 years, and then it kind of fell apart. Okay. So, okay. So O'Brien says, in many cases, the true war story cannot be believed. If you believe it, be skeptical. It's a question of credibility. Often the crazy stuff is true, and the normal stuff isn't, because the normal stuff is necessary to make you believe the truly incredible craziness. In other cases, you can't even tell a true war story. Sometimes it's just beyond telling. This is on 68. All right, so let's go back a little bit. He says, okay, so a true war story can't be believed, because when you tell it, people are like, how is that a story? Then there's this wonderful narrative that Michael Hare tells in Dispatches, where he's newly in Vietnam, and a soldier tells him a story. He says, patrol went up a mountain, one man came back, he died before he could tell us what happened. And Hare's like, okay, so where's the rest of the story? And the veteran's like, oh boy, you're an idiot. Oh boy, are you dumb? Because this is the story of Vietnam. It doesn't make sense, and you aren't going to get it. The stories are closed, they're hidden. The interpretation is cut off, it's suspended, and so on. So you tell a true war story, you think you're telling it, well, you can't believe it if it's true. If you believe it, be skeptical. In other words, you got to start doubting. As soon as you believe something, start doubting it. It's a question of credibility. And so then you get this, how do you make somebody believe what you believe? Well, maybe you have to tell a little lie. Maybe you got to make it sound a little crazy to make it come through to the person. So you say, this thing happened to me yesterday, and it was like, and you begin to use a metaphor to explain, instead of just saying, and then I fell down a hole on the sidewalk, and you're like, oh, it was very tough. It was very upsetting. And the person's like, yeah, I guess so. And you're like, when I fell into this hole, it was like my foot went through into the jaws of a beast. And the person's like, whoa, the jaws of a beast? That's a bit dramatic, Tim. It's like, right. But it got your attention. So it made you pay attention to what I was telling you. It wasn't true in any way, but I began to use techniques to get you to focus on what I want you to get. Okay, so sometimes it's beyond telling, so you can't tell. So the and he says on page 81, you can tell a true war story if you just keep on telling it, which means that repetition is going to become crucial to this process, and he is going to use repetition, right? It's the very first story, which is the most important in many ways. The book is distributed. There are important things everywhere throughout it. There is no one, this give you the clue, but he does use repetition in a number of the stories, and particularly in the things they carry, that is the titular story, the eponymous story. Okay, so have a look here at somebody who starts to tell a war story and then jams up and realizes that he owes the actual telling of the narrative to the person. So he comes back and he erases what he's done before and he tells the official, unofficial truth. Okay, so have a look at this story of San Juan Hill. All right.